Beyond Poker, a podcast that shows you how to apply the skills from poker to the world of entrepreneurship. Join me, Nick Howard, along with my co-host Wayne Yap, as we reveal the lessons learned from generating millions of dollars playing high-stakes poker and give you actionable tips and strategies to skyrocket your success in business. Whether you're a poker player who wants to build a business or a business owner who loves the game of poker, this podcast is for you.
All right, so we're live. Welcome to part 2. I guess the phase I want to hear about that really piqued my interest is when you talked about how you build team leaders and they're leading, and it's almost like there's a dynamic where there is the whole head coaches, and then there is the team leaders, and then it's almost like there's a hierarchy in some way. And in any kind of organization that thrives, like, it's a very efficient structure, but how do you go about developing that? Like, do you kind of take inspiration from the army, or how do you kind of get into that?
Sure. These types of questions I'm finding are easier if you answer them backwards. So I'll try that, and I think it's going to be simpler that way. I was talking to a buddy about this the other day. I start from the energy that I'm trying to provide to other people's experience. And then I reverse engineer systems and behavior from there. So when I had this vision for what I wanted the company to be, it was a cooperative unit of high performers that operated as a brotherhood. And from that vision, I started to say, well, what type of qualities need to be inherent at the high levels for everybody to feel? And then I couldn't fill in that word for a long time. What do they need to feel? And I brought myself back to my own journey because that's what I had to work off of. And as you know, a lot of the reason that I created Detox was because I was a lone wolf who ended up finding my way. But the thing that I lacked more than anything through that process was a brotherhood or a solid group of friends that I was able to relate to and that could support me and that I could contribute to along the way. I ended up sort of creating that because I guess I wanted to take ownership over the fact that when something doesn't exist, you should be the one to create it. But I contacted that energy when I was trying to solve this question. I was like, that loneliness, that sense of needing support, what would I really want there? What was I really lacking? And I arrived at this word, safety, that felt very resonant to me. I wanted to feel safe. Even my quest for success was driven by deep desire to feel safe enough to relax. In a lot of ways, my competitive strive was just designed to arrive at safety. So I took that back to the vision mapping of the company. I said, okay, what would make a high performer feel safe within a company where he is ascending in the ranks? I kept coming back to this dynamic of, you have to know that the coaches are your friends. Like, there has to be something about that doesn't feel corporate in nature. That was important to me. I didn't want to have a relationship with my players where they fear me and they have to do anything that I say for fear of getting fired or cut. Or it wasn't about that. It was about, if I'm going to build these guys up to be able to contribute back to me and have it be a two-way street, they have to feel empowered. And in order for them to feel empowered, they have to feel safe. So a lot of being a infinite-minded CEO, we talked about that concept in the last one of moving from the finite to the infinite game, from moving to competition to cooperation. A lot of that, I think, revolves around sacrificing control, surrendering power in the way that we typically think about power, which is this hierarchical, who's in command type of thing. And what I started to realize is, as long as certain players have demonstrated high levels of competence in their art, in their craft, I should be very, very willing to surrender control over the operations of this company, because by empowering them to start contributing back to what we're building, we start to see exponential growth coming in from all different angles. Because these guys who now feel like they have a contributional role and who feel safe enough to speak up and safe enough to mess up, that's a big thing too. Like, a huge part of our company narrative is like, mistakes don't exist. Yeah, you might have done something inaccurate, but take the lesson, learn from it, and expand and get back on your horse. Don't spend time going down a spiral of shame. So that would be the cliffs, I think, of that answer. Is I wanted to cultivate an environment of safety, because I knew that when a person feels safe is when they're doing their most inspired work. And the logistical balance to that was, let's just identify the guys that are already demonstrating high performance behavior and integrate them with an executive culture that makes them feel like they're part of it as an equal, instead of holding this control-based command over them where it instills an aspect of fear that could pollute their creative drive. So the company benefits from that because you get more diverse executive contribution, which actually allows me to do much less work and get way more done. Like, I haven't built a module in the course in over a year now because all my best players do it. Sure, I'm advising it, but most of what I'm doing is making sure that the macro pieces make sense in terms of overall course alignment, and then just providing support to the guys who are doing all the hard work.
I love how you build that up, and that makes a lot of sense. Like, I like how you explain that a lot as well. One thing that sticks out to me is that it's a really good environment for people to grow for two reasons. One is that they're in an environment where the people around them will hold them accountable. And two, they're in an environment where there are going to be people that are I guess, newer than them, and I guess that they can teach. It's like kind of like how I think about it, like when you're networking and stuff like that. It's quite beneficial for you to network upwards, to network sideways, and to network downwards. Like, you always want to be training and helping people because that really allows you to explain yourself better and to understand concepts better. Having peers to go along the same journey with is always extremely useful as well. And having people that you can learn from,
absolutely,
is like, I mean, that's kind of obvious. It's definitely useful. And the environment that you create really allows people to get all three of this. And what I find that you are really good at is, I mean, creating a community and sort of like creating that almost like, I guess it's not the best way to put it. I can't really think of the right way, but to create almost like a community downwards from you in some ways, where it's like to the point where they kind of become your equals in some way.
Yeah, that's another aspect that I think I could give a cool example of. It's not downward and it's not upward. A good community is supporting itself in like this conglomerate of angles. Like, it's like swirling almost, and there's support coming from up and down and side. And so there's two things I can point out here that I think are going to be really helpful in terms of community development and what seems to work. And I'm speaking from a practical layer here because I don't think this is something I would have thought of in theory. In fact, I can definitely say I didn't, because I only learned this through observation. So we went on a team trip, I forget when, but a little while back. And it was at the stage in our company where we finally had established like a handful of high stakes players that were on the team at the same time, which was a different type of company dynamic. Because once you start to have 5 or 10 guys on a 30, 40 player team who are high stakes leaders, the company structure, the team structure takes on a different dynamic. There is way less confusion and doubt around the system actually being legitimate when peers are seeing their teammates succeeding at high stakes. It's one thing for a coach to say, hey guys, we have a system that works. Here's a graph of a sample that the coaches have put in. It's a complete other thing for players to come in from the same training flight and develop alongside each other. And some guys get to the top faster than others. And now, if you're a struggling player, you have a high division friend who trained alongside you, who's able to say, look, bro, the shit works and I'm here to help. And I want to have real conversations with you about where you're not seeing things clearly and where you're misapplying strategy so that we can bring you up. So I saw this for the first time on a team trip where a higher division player had been in a starting flight, a training flight with a player who was still stuck at a low division. These guys are friends. These guys came into program at the same time. We all go out and we get wasted one night at a club. This would be in Spain. And I went out with the young kids that night because the 24-year-olds on the team, they like to party, these European guys. So my partner and I, Gabe, we went out and we got lit that night. I remember we were all just basically stumbling home. And I happened to have, I had my phone on me, which is not rare, but I happened to have the wherewithal about me to hit my voice recorder and turn it on as a conversation developed, a very drunken conversation, but a very true conversation developed between this high division player and his low division friend about why this kid, the low division kid, wasn't getting good results. And I have that recording somewhere and I've clipped it down, but it was such a beautiful example of how much of an impact a high performer can have on a lower performer when they're on the same team, because the level that high division player is able to communicate from is a different level than the coach will ever be able to access towards the Division I student. And I saw that night. I was like, holy shit, he's able to speak to him from a friendship peer level that invokes a level of confidence that I can never instill. And the reason is the Division I player can't relate to my position and my journey as much because he didn't see it happen in real time. If you go through a process with someone and see them ascend, which is what happened with these two, he can connect to that vision of what his brother did by getting through the ranks in that amount of time and having that level of success. And it made it much easier for him to piece it together as a reality. Now, whether or not they end up acting on that is a whole other story, but I saw that synergy in that moment and I was like, that's something that's different. And my sensitivity to that, I think, has been primed over time, that when I see deep level connection occurring in a training moment, that's a system that stands out to me. So from there, I started to have more ideas for, okay, how do we put high division players in a position where they can have more influence over lower division players? And we created a whole unit of the company, which is peer-to-peer, which is a system where lower division players can get training from their higher division peers, and the company supports a portion of it financially, and the lower division players also have skin in the game too. It's a well-rounded aspect of our culture now that seems to have provided some serious gains. So that is just one example of how to start bringing in support from different angles. That would be top to bottom. But then there's also stuff that I do, which I think is unique and sort of unprovable. But if we have a really struggling group of trainees, I'll appoint a collection of guys that volunteer that are just one level above them. And my idea behind this is sometimes the guy who's most equipped to get you to the next level is the guy who most recently made it there.
How do you think about this when it applies outside of poker? Because poker, in a way, two things. Firstly, there's sort of a ceiling in some ways where you can only play so big. There's not going to be that many games anymore. When your players reach high stakes, the highest stakes games online, it's that's pretty much it. You can't really play any bigger. And the second thing is, you're kind of not really playing anymore as well right now. When it comes to infinite game outside of poker, because in a way the ceiling in poker is just there, right? And when you are playing the game of business, for example, there's sort of no ceiling. How do you kind of bring this dynamic into business?
Sure. Well, I focus on timing a lot. I gave a story about building a player up. I think either at the beginning of this episode or last episode, it's all a fog. I told that story about the high division player who had lost confidence and needed a new inspiration for what his future was going to look like, and it needed to feel like it didn't just all revolve around poker, because like you said, there is a very clear ceiling, and it is a brutal industry of variance. And so I focus on finding moments in time where I feel like there's an invitation to bring a level of emotional support through a higher perspective. And in that conversation, that perspective was letting that player know that because he had already achieved high division and he had been integrated with this executive team, we leave no man behind. You asked me if we do anything like the Army, that would be my Army approach. Assuming that you have not been stagnating for record time, we're not interested in leaving any high performer behind. just because they go through a bout of variance that can be explained by variance. This is where the high performer loses confidence, is they're unable to distinguish what is variance and what might actually be me falling off. And that's where we need peer review to be able to say, hey man, this is variance, and we want you to have as much support and confidence in this as possible. And then my job, I feel like, is to go one level up from that and be like, and also you are safe in a team that thinks at a very high level and has a lot of creative capacity for umbrella projects that you're going to be involved in. So yeah, my focus has shifted almost entirely from my personal poker career to being sort of the figurehead of the company that is at the intersection between the emotional support of the team and the development of the umbrella project that will occur next. I sort of see myself at that crossroads, if you will, and I try to leverage the potential of every member on the team from that position.
And what's the umbrella project? You mentioned it a few times.
It's still developing, just like the title of our podcast seems to be, but it has a lot to do with this community building aspect and finding different ways to leverage the financial success that players have had in poker and potentially even other high performance industries with other business ventures, but with a very deep and honest mindset performance flavor to that community. I really want to work with guys that are interested in this vertical path of self-inquiry. We talked about in the last episode that there's two types of attention that you can pay to logistics. One is a very mouse on a wheel, let's keep doing the same thing. And one is like, let's go deeply into the motivational systems that are actually causing us to perceive value in directions that might not be highest implied for our overall fulfillment. That's really the mindset work that I'm trying to get to the bottom of with guys. And I feel like that's where the deepest connection lies with a human being, because that's where you really unlock life purpose. And I feel like business is a great way to get the benefits out of knowing yourself at a deeper level, while also being able to reflect off of peers in a safe environment who are willing to go to those deep and non-judgmental layers with you. The non-judgment is hugely important in feeling safe. So it's something that I see business as a great catalyst for. I see it as a great cooperative aspect of deep self-development, because as you're knowing more about yourself, especially if you have entrepreneurial blood, you're having better ideas. You're coming up with cool ideas for projects. If you have a community that is also guys like that, joint ventures start popping up out of nowhere, and you have that same type of synergetic effect that I explained on the Coaching for Profits training team, where like the high division guys just start coming up with great ideas that then the company owners can leverage project investments toward. So it's like that.
Yeah, that's kind of what would be really interesting for us to do going forward in some ways, where create sort of this community of high performers. Like when you kind of reach the ceiling of poker, you want to go into business, and it's like a supportive environment, because it's like a leap of faith. It's really scary to move on from poker. There's so many unknowns. And to be honest, like I thought I was pretty smart. Like I studied a lot. I read a lot of books. I read like 100 business books. But when I moved on to business, it still wasn't easy. Like I made so many mistakes, so many things I didn't know. And I kind of did it sort of on my own. I guess because I'm a bit of that sort of person, I just go. Other people won't come along for the ride as quickly as me. So I'm always like, generally I'm the scout. I run ahead.
That's a great way of putting it. One thing that I have really taken on as an explanation of the role that I feel like I'm best fit in. I mentioned that I've learned how to support a human being. I've learned how to support a high performer. I love your idea of being a scout, because that's exactly what this adventurous entrepreneur does, especially if he has a service-oriented mindset that wants to parlay that information back over to a community that's coming up from behind him. The word that I really gravitated toward, I heard somebody say this recently, and I sort of stole it or smuggled it. Smuggler is the word that I've actually started to really identify with in terms of my creative process. so much of what I'm doing is listening to a lot of different resources, picking that one or two words from it that generate a theme where I can say, okay, these guys are talking about the same thing. It's hidden, but it's here. And this is a concept that would apply to any high performer, but not all high performers might be looking in this direction. In fact, they might not even be available to the language being used here. You use the word faith. I would almost argue that that can trigger people if they come from too big of a value judgment against that word entirely. So what I like to do is I like to look at different texts. I like to look at different methods. And regardless of the language being used and how much it might put people off, I try to distill the core essence of the concept being expressed. Like you can look at like samurai texts and get a different flavor of how they express essential principles. And I take those and I smuggle them into what I think is a structurally, scientifically accurate language that I can convey to a high performer in any field, and that they'll actually have more availability to it being presented in that way because it's palatable to them. So yeah, I love this idea of the scout and the smuggler. I think we go hand in hand there. It's like you scout it out and you find these new methodologies that really work, and then being able to build a powerful methodology requires that you build a proper linguistic bridge for people who might not be tolerable of certain ways of expressing language. And the faith thing stands out to me because I do pull a lot of essential concepts from religious texts after distilling the ideology out of it completely. I don't need to talk about a sense of whether or not God exists to teach you the value of having faith. Faith is a high performance concept. It's about venturing into the unknown before you know what's really there, with the capacity you already have for discernment and catching your footing as you take the next step. Stuff like this, I think, is important to talk about, because we as high performers have a weakness where we have an aversion to exploring different methodologies because of the potential language being used that conflicts with our current paradigm. And that's a defense mechanism, and that will obstacle you from integrating highly useful concepts for you. So I like to surround myself with people who can have any conversation without being triggered, who can listen to any video on YouTube, no matter how absurd it seems to be, and then walk away from that and be like, you know what, like that was crazy, but this one or two things that guy talked about, like I noticed those were true. And maybe this is the real skill set of what I'm really describing here, is the ability to watch anything, listen to anyone, no matter what your preconceived judgments might be towards someone who looks like that or sounds like that, and to be able to recognize from an energetic place of intuitive congruence and a combination of all the other discerned reference points that you have for what they're speaking about, that something about what is being conveyed here and expressed is logical and true. That is the skill, and being able to take that little nugget out from whatever you just listened to or watched and put that back into your personal philosophy and organize it. And now you have your own dossier, your own archive developing of all the best things you've ever heard anybody say that resonate. And then you find a way to convey that in a logically consistent manner. That is, I think, what true methodology is at a high level. It is smuggling, it is scouting, and it is conveying it in a supportive enough manner where people feel safe enough to listen, safe enough to integrate it, and safe enough to participate.
And when you try to smuggle this language to your team, for example, do you tend to have a set of vocabulary, a set of words, so that you can use the different word to a different person? Or how do you approach that?
Intuitively. It's an intuitive thing what words I'll use with a specific player based on history, based on what I know about what methods and ideologies they're open to. Really, if you're being of service in an instructive way, it can't be about you having a preference to explain something in your own way. That would be a bias. If your true intention is to serve and to create a bridge for that person to come up, you need to be deeply in connection with intuitive requests for what type of language is the most effective for them to grab onto. And that's a That's a very mysterious process, and one that I don't know that I could explain in a scientific way, but I do think it exists. And in a lot of ways, the words that I'm choosing for this conversation are not really coming from a conscious level of processing. It's a combination of me getting reps in with using words that I feel like are structurally accurate and that exist in my vocabulary, and then weaving in around the degree of nuance that I want to go to with a certain concept to make sure that it's still palatable for the audience that may only heard us speak for an hour up until now. So maybe we don't want to go to super meta level concepts, even though we're probably trending on them already. So it's all that. It's an awareness over the vocabulary that is structurally accurate. It's an awareness over the ideology or the vocabulary or the ethnicity of the player I'm talking to. I'm going to explain something to a Brazilian different than I would a USA player, an American player. And then beyond that, it's an awareness over where I'm trying to bring the conversation up to at a higher level and trying to reverse engineer all that in real time. So I can't say I'm perfect at it, and I'm definitely doing a lot wrong, but that's the progression. And I think it is a high level communicational balance, but it is guided mostly intuitively, and it pulls from the archive of data and linguistic accuracy that you've already built up through all that scouting and smuggling that you've done.
Wow, yeah, that's a very deep explanation. And to be honest, I find it a little bit hard to grasp. The part that I find a little bit tricky mainly is when I'm the scout, I go and figure all of these things out. I generally tend to be quite good at integrating these things into my own life, into my own perspective. I can live these things. I mean, I'm not perfect. Sometimes I kind of don't hold myself to high, like I don't integrate everything, right? What I guess that I really take away from this conversation is that I'm actually not that great at helping the people around me understand the things that I've learned. Probably because I'm not smuggling the words enough. Like I'm not choosing
You're
the
a
right
scout.
words.
I mean, it could be a big part of it. And it's also important to remember that like there's a fine line here too, where the moment that you need to have an effect on someone in the learning process is the moment where you make yourself responsible for them understanding. And that is a toxic pattern that I think a lot of coaches fall into. You have to be okay with the fact that it might just not land with someone. And that actually makes it more likely that it will, because if you pollute communication with an energy that makes someone feel unsafe, to go back to that word, if I'm trying to show you something and you feel like I deeply need you to understand it or you're going to get in trouble, we're right back to a paradigm where we got punished as children and where it was not safe to not know something. That's a very stressful place for someone to try to be learning from. So again, it just comes back to so much about community building revolves around safety, because a strong community that is creative and high potential needs to be thinking accurately. They need to be creative, and creativity happens best when the nervous system relaxes. So the two sides of the communal coin are make people feel safe and honor their strengths, whether you're a scout, a smuggler, a high division poker player, or an entrepreneur looking to get involved in JVs with other people who like what you do. Identify people's strengths, make them feel safe for them, and put them in positions where they can actually leverage creativity and watch what happens.
Okay, this is definitely some things I'm gonna have to journal and think more about. I feel like this is another topic that is like you can talk about infinitely. There's always a bit of a pull of like, okay, when you're a scout, like I might be the kind of person that I would be a scout and then I would kind of learn about somebody else's culture and never want to come back. It's like,
yeah, that can be probably the most confusing part, is we're never all just one thing either. And we might be a different thing at a different phase in our life. But that goes back to becoming comfortable with the uncertainty of it. Are you open to your skill set shifting at a stage where the timing and the resources you have access to and the people who are influencing you are just facilitating that shift inside of you? So much of this, I think, to tie in the last two episodes, to tie them together, performance resilience and community building, is about having enough self-awareness through asking personally honest questions to be flexible enough to change your trajectory in the people you hang out with, in the programs you become interested in the methodologies that you adopt. Being able to be versatile in that sense is probably the number one skill set that will prevent you from missing great opportunities. And I think that's really, I feel like opportunity might be a cool word for the title of this pod, but like that really is a feeling word for me, that like what this is when you transition out of poker is you actually validating new opportunities that you previously did not validate because you didn't have this conversation yet. Nobody raised this level of awareness yet. And I hope what we're doing is inspiring people to see that there is an actual tangible reality here that is within reach. If you feel like a poker player at a crossroads, you're not more than a couple steps away from shifting your trajectory, especially if you've reached a high level in your craft already, because you already have a lot of these balances incorporated, and you just need a new outlet for them and a new community to support them.
The part I would like to touch a bit more about is that, like me being the scout that I am, I just dive into things and I jump away from poker and things like that. It's still not easy for me. And I would like to honor the fact that you as a poker player are thinking about moving on from poker, because it's sort of not something that everybody has the courage to do. I'm in a place where I definitely feel like if more of us do this together, there's a certain network effect of us understanding each other and us creating a certain support network. And I mean, there's just so many intelligent people that can't make the leap.
I think you nailed it. And the reason that they can is because they don't feel safe enough to. I'll keep bringing it back to that. You said in the first episode, there's so much raw intelligence in poker. And what is missing is the safety, the feeling of safety that allows a player like that to be able to make the transition. And that's a two-sided coin. We need to build perspectives around where you have blind spots that make you feel unsafe. And then we need to just go to the unreasonable level and give guys just emotional support that says, and we're going to do this together in a community that does not create any judgment, and where you are absolutely safe to express your feelings and whatever sort of shit you're dealing with that you can't figure out yourself. This is a group of guys that is here to round out and balance those aspects of you so we can actually cultivate an environment that has a synergy to it where we all end up benefiting at higher levels from each other's development. The implies of a human being are unfathomable, and I think it's so underrated that we don't invest more in relationships that could have huge 10, 20-year net implies, not just on the financial plane, but on the contributional human connection plane. I think if we saw that window, we would spend much more time taking chances on community building. That's a huge point that I've never really thought about before, but that just feels so true. You can give me a net negative EV on paper of a community, and I'll take a chance on it, and I'll justify it as being very plus EV because everyone is underrated. Everyone is undervaluing how awesome the success of that community will be. That is something you cannot quantify. I think it will always be underrated.
Yeah, the compound effect that comes up from human relationship, especially when it's like me and you, we have a relationship, we have more trust. It's just easier for us to do things. Like if we're going to go into business right now, like a lot of things, like, you know, we kind of like, okay, in future, we'll kind of discuss it. We trust each other to be fair. It's a lot easier to do business like that. And then if there's a bunch of other people that are operating on the same level, the compound effect kind of, it multiplies, right? It becomes exponential, or it goes to like one level beyond exponential, attrition or whatever you call it.
Especially as you introduce more and more time, it just continues to expand. And that's what I mean when I say I don't think it'll ever be able to be properly quantified, because the sample size that you would need to be able to track something like that, first you'd have to follow people who are authentically committed to that path. And I think a lot of people say that, you know, they're into networking and they're into giving disproportionate amounts of value up front without expectation. But like, you need to hold a lot of variables stable to even get a clue of how valuable it is over time. And I think time is the most valuable dimension here. Like, it's unfathomable how making 3 really good friends when you're 30 years old and leveraging their networks over 2 decades changes your entire world by the time you're 50.
Yeah, especially if everybody's trying to help each other out. It's just, yeah, it's really powerful.
Powerful stuff.
What do you think about, okay, in my personal life right now, as I'm building my own tribe, my own community, there's a lot of people that kind of like, they want to explore this high performance life to some degree, yet there's always certain barriers that they are running into that like doesn't let them dive deeper into taking more control of their performance.
Yeah, I want to tell a story, even though it's kind of out there. This is a real story that happened at a dinner with one of our CFP trainees. I think we were even at Atlanta. Okay, so this kid was extremely dedicated to wanting to play poker at a very high level. And one of the reasons I drafted this kid is because I was very aware of his love for the game. And we were at dinner and he was the center of the conversation for whatever reason. And the conversation drifted towards sort of a surface level inquiry of why he needed so badly to get to high stakes to prove himself. This was running his narrative, basically. And I'm telling this story because this is a player who was very locked into the paradigm at the time of, I got to succeed in poker, and poker is the only way that I'm going to be succeeding in life. That is the only option, basically. So I asked this kid a question. It was a ridiculous question. I said, I'll give you 2 options. You can either be the next Linus Love, you can be the number 1 player in the world, or you can be a hero, like a actual war hero. Like, you do something crazy and heroic enough in public spotlight that you're on the news as the new world hero who saved 1,000 people from a terrorist attack, something crazy. I think I actually used the example of you saved a plane that was going to go down at the 9/11 terrorist attack. You were that passenger who stood up and tackled the terrorist and took charge and saved everyone. I created an example like that. Which of those guys would you rather be? And he instantly said, I'd rather be the poker player. I'd rather be the successful poker player. And I was like, that right there, brother, that is a fucking blind spot. You might actually really love poker, but to answer that question so quickly exposes that you really think that is the only path for your fulfillment and for you to get whatever validation you think you need to get from the community that you think you value it from, the industry that you value it from. So it's just a really extreme example of how these mental pathways get formed, where like you get this idea that you need to be something, and it's so hard to give it up because it requires a lot of maturity to step back and say, that was a framework that likely developed when I was a child, and it came from this child mindset or a much more immature mindset than I'm in right now. And maybe it is time to take a step back and consider this from a more complete perspective and actually ask myself honest questions as to what generates fulfillment. And I think often you'll find that it is a combination of community support and contribution. And I think for most people, with some anomalies, but not many, what we are finding as successful poker players is that it does not offer that contributional aspect that really completes the fulfillment circle. And I think that's where you transition into the cooperative plane. Because if I had to say what the weakness in poker is as a structure, as a system, it trends competitive. It almost is impossible for this to be a perfectly fulfilling model, this career as a poker player. I think you can pull it off if you find very creative ways to create a team dynamic and cooperative focus and leverage umbrella projects. In a way, I think that's what I'm trying to do. And more and more I wake up every day thinking the poker thing is going to become more of a distant star for me over the next 5 years, because even though it is a bridge for greater cooperation, it doesn't have enough potential overall to be fully cooperative. Like, it's not like I tell my partner Gabe, we have this ongoing joke that like our dream is to just open a coffee shop together at some point, because there's something about, besides the fact that we're both obsessed with coffee, it's like the totally uncompetitive realm of just doing something to serve people. And I guess you're competing with the coffee shop next door if you really want to break it down business wise, but like reporting to a culture and an environment where you're really just enjoying the presence of others and providing a service for the sake of just for the raw sake of it. There's just a different vibe around those types of ventures, I guess. And I never fully found a poker player to be able to free himself from competitive stress. And I think that's something that causes me to think it will become a distant star, because after you glean the balances that are there to be collected and acquired from being in a competitive focus, you sort of drift out of the need to explore that any further. And that's where you really start to gravitate towards more cooperative projects and maybe hopefully have a bigger contribution to the planet as a whole by leveraging resources in directions that are overall more morally complete. Not that there's anything provably immoral about poker, but at the end of the day, we are fighting for each other's money and taking it from people who don't know much about the game. And there is something inherently manipulative about that you'll never quite be able to get down to zero. You'll never quite be able to get that purity down to zero with poker if you're approaching it as a competitive thing. And I've met very, very few people who are able to purify their poker lens completely, but I don't want to say it's impossible.
A question that pops up in my head, and I really, it's a burning question I really want to know, is what makes you sort of still hold on to poker to a relatively large degree instead of just kind of moving on to something at a much quicker rate? Because obviously you're still building a company and you're still putting on new projects on that front. And of course, maybe that's supporting the community and things like that.
Sure. 3 things in order of importance. I love my team, and I actually love reporting to work and having the consults and the calls and the conversations with the guys that I'm training. I'm learning a lot from the new communicational role that I've put myself in. If I had to describe my role in that company right now, I'm CEO and CXO simultaneously, and mindset coach. CXO being Chief Experience Officer. I'm like tapped in optically through all the systems I've set up, getting reports from all the other executives on who's doing well and who needs more support. I'm tapped to the emotional pulse of the team, and I'm learning a lot about how to provide unconditional levels of support to people who are at different phases in their process. I'm learning a ton from that. So there's a relevance aspect of me remaining here. It's sharpening my sword of communicational maturity for sure. And then there is this third aspect that feels a little bit more stressful, but not in a bad way, just like almost in a business obligation way. There are people who really depend on this company existing for their livelihood right now. Our players and their families depend on this opportunity. So for me to just move on before the company is effectively delegated and almost turnkey, it feels a little bit selfish to me. I want to get this company where people can replace me almost and train everybody up to that level so the company can operate for itself. And then I don't have to pull the plug on it. I can just go on and do my own thing and sell the company or delegate all roles to people who I think are mentally fit to run it.
Yeah, because from it's always the perspective of like when you are helping this community, you're also not giving yourself the opportunity to make a bigger impact somewhere else. And
that's a good point. And I guess the way I deal with that is by leveraging it against time and saying, okay, I am gaining specific balances here. I'm learning a ton that will come to fruition in a much more productive way in a future project. So I see this time spent with the company as from the connections side of it, I see it as I'm making lifelong friends here. Some of my players, I'm convinced, are going to be my friends for life, like brotherhood type of connections. And then I'm also learning how to communicate at a higher level from the position I'm in, which is someone who's required to support people who need support, who are coming up on a higher performance path. So there's a high level of relevance in making sure I develop myself in that way before I put myself into a larger scene where I'm going to need higher levels of performance resilience myself. So yeah, the role has changed from poker player to poker coach to poker CEO to now I don't even know what I would call myself. Like it's that blend of community building and creativity, but it's blossoming into something that I know is so versatile as a skill set. Like I kept coming back to this, that I feel like I'm learning how to support a person. And it was something that started with me changing my relationship to myself and learning to honor this emotional side of the spectrum, learning to honor how to look at things in a slightly different way that wasn't all just analytical wisdom hammering my way to the top, and then seeing the benefits and how that opened up my fulfillment levels and my perspective. I was able to build that into the program in a way that I think offers holistic levels of support. And I plan to keep doing that with larger communities, I guess. But it starts here.
Wisdom hammering is like a very yeah, it's a funny word to hear, but it's
thanks.
Like
I made that one up because I think it gives a sense of imagery that any high performer can relate to.
Yeah. And so you talk a lot about Poker Detox, your community. What are your plans with that right now? And if as you are, I guess, plotting a way out, you're also going to bring some people out, and I guess you're still going to take new people into the community. How's that?
Yes.
What's the plan for that? And what if someone wants to join?
It's going to be hard to secure a role on the team, at least both sides of the team. Okay, so I'll back up. We recently, with 2020 being our best year so far, it just became relevant for us to polarize into higher level performance. And that means setting a higher bar for the expectations of our players. And that was an interesting community decision from my vantage point, because in the most recent wave of my consults, maybe 2 iterations ago, so like sort of by spring of this year, I started just keeping an ear to the ground to how can I make your guys' experience better? And I was mostly focused on the voices of the highest performers on the team, because I think those guys deserve more control over the company. And the resounding request from the higher division players was, we sense that this community is being partially distracted by players who are not firmly rooted in a growth mindset. So some of the lower division players who aren't as focused on improvement and aren't as logistically devoted, they tend to have I don't want to say a toxic effect, that would be kind of extreme, but they cause a distraction in the energy of the overall team. And if the team operates as a unit, which is what starts to happen, the more cooperative of a focus is put on an environment like that, you start to hear complaints coming from the upper tier, not in the form of just like, not your usual complaints like victim complaints, but just like, we sense something is off here. We sense that the community culture is being limited because of the fact that there are players on this team that are not even interested in being here at a fundamental level. And by that, I mean, like, they think they are, but deeply down in the roots of the mind, they don't actually want to do what it takes to succeed. They're just convinced that this is what they have to do for whatever reason. So coming away from that wave of consults, I decided that the position the company was at was one that we were never at before, because we had a surplus of high division players that were currently on the team for the first time, to change the dynamic of the team to the point where they could voice an opinion about the direction they wanted the company to go. And they chose to polarize towards higher expectations, which makes my life easy, because I'm conveying the overall energy of the team simply as the vessel that is in the position where I am the one who tells the team where we're at and where we're headed, as opposed to me coming from a control-based place where I'm like, hey guys, we're not making enough money. Everybody needs to perform at a higher level. Like there's a massive difference between those two incentives in my role. I can either be aligned with what the team wants to move to a higher synergy of cooperation and mindset freedom and success, or I can be coming from a control-based coaching imbalance where I'm lecturing players that they're not performing well enough and we're not getting the results that we want on a corporate level. I don't like that frame. So yeah, the direction of the company is moving towards elite contracts where, you still have a chance to come up through training, but we don't tolerate stagnation anymore. We need to see that you are growing as a human being every month, and we have enough optics on all of our players because we're in communication enough that we really know what's going on in your life. And that's the reason too where I wanted to stay under 50 players, because the executive team, if it's going to have that level of connection, we can't handle much more than 50 or 60 players on the cash game wing. So as soon as I discussed this new concept with the tournament side of the company, they gravitated toward it too, and they're like, we're basically going to do the same thing. So that's where we're at right now. I think both arms of the company will be polarizing towards more elite contracts and sort of higher requirements for trainees. Maybe not necessarily higher recruitment requirements, but you are expected to come up the ranks in an efficient manner if you join our company in the future. And I think it'll be easier to do that because it's definitely easier to become the average of your 5 best friends in a high performance way when 3 out of 4 of the guys to your immediate left are high performer, high stakes players already. So
it's so fascinating to hear how you talk about it. And I'm kind of wondering if a business owner or somebody that doesn't play that much poker can still relate to this story and still understand. I guess because I've always been thinking about like, how can I actually develop a community, and how it's like your whole CFP thing, right? Like, how can I bring this CFP thing into business? How can I really develop the same dynamic? Because in poker, it's kind of clear that everybody's focused on the same goal, to become better at poker in some way. Whereas in business, everybody kind of needs to find their own skill set. Everybody needs to find what their superpower or their unique ability is.
Totally.
And it's a lot harder to kind of groom many different apprentices, unless like I'm a jack of all trades and then I groom 10 that are good at 10 different things, and then they groom another few more underneath them.
This is why
what am I missing here?
The community building aspect of it really solves that whole problem, especially when you're already selecting guys who have demonstrated high performance genes. Because those guys are already working with, say, entrepreneurial DNA, and they already have that creative drive, and they already have all these ideas flowing. You put them in a community where they can actually start to combine those ideas together. And what you're dealing with is like a very highly concentrated juice, creative juice, as opposed to, taking a lot of low performers and taking on the obligation of needing to build them up toward a higher level of performance resilience. I really think that like what we're doing, especially what you're doing with your most elite package, is like you're at a stage in your business career where you have earned the right to start pre-selecting the community around highest performers and people who already have demonstrated performance potential in other avenues. And I think that's really what the Crossroads is about. It's like, oh, you were successful over here, let's jump the track over here and put us all together. And this is not a judgment against the low performer. It's just there are levels to this. And it's not relevant as a very high performer to spend the bulk of your time around low performers trying to uplift them, unless you're doing it in a very focused way because that is the overall endeavor of the company or project you're working on. That would be what I'm sort of doing. And now we're even moving away from the phase where we focus more on low performers because we've just evolved toward a high performance unit. So yeah, it matters a ton who you select for these types of projects, because you can't necessarily train up everybody into one methodology in business. Everybody has their own jack of all trades skill sets. They've developed those skill sets largely from the entrepreneurial venture they've been in before, whether as a poker player or something else. And what you're creating here is a way for those guys who already have skill sets to come together and be supported in a new unknown venture where when that juice starts flowing, weird things start to happen, awesome things start to happen. And they have you as the expert sort of conductor of the whole project. You're like conducting this orchestra on your little scout horse, and basically leading these guys into a new level of entrepreneurial growth.
Yeah, it's really fun and really exciting. It's like 99% exciting, and then the 1% of me is like, what if I'm leading them down the wrong direction? And
Well,
yeah.
that's the part where you can inject the level 3 performance resilience and say that there is no wrong direction, because we are equipped with the heightened perspectives that will allow us to course correct soon enough so that nothing spins too far out of control. And God forbid the sky falls completely. We're going to learn from that too, because we have each other and we're safe together. And we know that we're in this for the learning experience. See, that is more powerful than any business success you'll ever have. I almost have fantasies about like a business failing and I'm sitting around with my brothers who I failed with. That would be like my army visual of like, I want to be around the type of guys that I would feel comfortable with in war, type of guys who, you know, have your back no matter what. Like that's part of my deepest feeling vision, is that level of camaraderie and that level of unconditional support, almost like a family level support, where you can do no wrong because you're not being judged by your logistical accuracy. You're being judged by your character and your attempt. And there's something noble about that, something noble about being in an energy of people that have polarized to that level of personal honor.
Yeah, I guess the key is that I myself, when I'm being the scout to some degree, I don't feel that safety just yet. And that's something that that's very eye-opening for me.
That's a very personally honest statement that if you stay with long enough, you're going to find a really cool answer to. I have felt like that. I can relate to that. I still feel like that at times. And what has helped for me, if I may offer just a suggestion, is open yourself up more to the support from the team. Because even though you are leading, these guys have the capacity to give back to you too. I have like a series of notes where I write down all the best compliments I feel like I've ever received from my players, like tear-jerking levels of compliments that like I never thought that guy would have said that when I drafted him. But seeing the growth and seeing how much they appreciate you putting yourself out there in that way, I think you'll find a lot of hidden support in the people that you're helping if you start to allow it and receive it, because you are in a leadership position, but you also are a human, and there are ways to find a two-way street there in terms of connection.
Yeah, that's really powerful. All right, I guess we can leave it and that. Leave this episode with that, because I think that's a really powerful one.
We covered a lot of territory, Scout.
All right, smuggler.
I'll see you in the next one. What was it, episode 3? And hopefully we'll have a title.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, Nick here, and thanks for listening to the Beyond Poker podcast, where we explore a wide range of topics bridging from poker to lifestyle to entrepreneurship. In order to make it as easy as possible for you to plug into our network, Wayne and I have recorded a special episode where we unpack one of the most common questions asked by poker players. Where can I take my skills from here, and what can I do next? To find that episode, go to beyondpoker.com/guide and check out the new path we've created to help someone like you diversify from poker and into a larger business arena. An arena where you can experience the fulfillment of playing positive-sum games, where everybody wins, and where you can feel like you're part of a team that's making an impact on the world. To download that episode, go to beyondpoker.com/guide, and as always, feel free to reach out to Wayne or I with a question, or just to say hi. Or hey, what's up? How you doing? Let's get a coffee. Something. Alright, I appreciate you guys listening. I hope you felt the connection, and we hope you reach out so we can have the opportunity to get to know you better.